What's the most important game of the 2025 season, aside from Texas, because we know that's always the most important game. But what's the most important game after that? We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Again, thanks for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Jay, if you're looking at the 2025 schedule, I think you could probably name a number of games that are the next most important game on the schedule after Texas. What is it for you, though, the one that stands out the most?
This was a little bit tougher for me when we kind of talked about it because I had to ask myself, is it going to be a home game? Is it going to be a road game? Is it going to be early? Is it going to be late? And besides the fact that this entire season is critical for, just the livelihood of our entire coaching staff. Yeah. But if I had to pick one, it's got to be that Michigan game at home. It's going to be that one that's going to be the mood setter. It's going to be the one that tells us it's going to be the pulse reader for us, for lack of better terms. It's going to one that's going to tell us if this offense is, legitimate or not. It's going to tell us if Ben Arbuckle was real or not. It's going to be the one that's going to tell us all of that. Because truth be told, I have no concerns on the defensive side of the ball, especially going against Michigan. Now, I know they got Bryce Underwood, who I think is going to be a monster at the collegiate level, but Michigan hasn't shown us that they can get a quarterback to really get going over the last 10 years. It has not been a situation where no matter who's been the coach, it just hasn't felt like a quarterback has figured out how to play football again. I mean, the last one was Denard Robinson, and for the most part, Denard was a running back out there at quarterback. So I haven't seen them actually show us anything. I mean, they've got with Jaden Davis as well as another backup. He's a true freshman this past year, so he'll be a redshirt freshman going into next season. So the question is, can Jaden win the job away from Bryce Underwood, in which we're all expecting, Bryce to walk in as a true freshman? But bringing a true freshman here into Norman against this defense? Oh, yeah. Let me have that game, too. I may be more concerned about Bryce around, the week 11, but right now, absolutely not. But this is the game to me that's really going to set the tone of what this team's going to be. Which game was the one that jumped out to you as second in command behind that Texas game?
Yeah, I think the Michigan one is a really, really good choice because we're going to find out a lot about what this team's about coming into the 2025 season. If they go and they beat Michigan and they do it convincingly, say they do it by double digits, similar to what Texas did this past year, I think it's going to make you feel a certain kind of way about where Oklahoma's going. Now, for me, I'm going to still want them to prove it each and every single week because you're going to have bigger tests throughout the 2025 season. And I think the game that really means a lot to Oklahoma, and I think that it's going to be the one that has significant implications on their college football playoff aspirations, it's that Tennessee game on November 1st. You're coming out of a stretch where you play Texas, at South Carolina, Ole Miss, at Tennessee, right before you go into a bye week. And then you come out of the bye week and you play at Alabama, Missouri, and LSU to finish the season. You've got to have good vibes coming out of that Tennessee game.
It's true.
If you go to Neyland Stadium and you get beat by double digits like you did this last year against Josh Heupel going into the bye, you can probably kiss the college football playoff goodbye. I mean, yeah. I don't want to be that big of a Debbie Downer about one game because what if Oklahoma is undefeated going into that one and they lose it? I don't think it's the end of the world, but I don't necessarily expect Oklahoma to be undefeated going into that November 1st game. If you're sitting at, 8-1 going into the bye, I think you're in a great spot. If you're sitting at 7-2 going into the bye with Alabama, Mizzou, and LSU coming up, I don't love it so much. So you got to get that win over Tennessee coming out of going into the bye week, because especially that 4-game stretch, there's no reprieve. There's Texas, there's South Carolina, at South Carolina, there's Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss is going to be a very different looking team this next season than what they were in 2024, when honestly you had them on the ropes in the first half. But I still think that Lane Kiffin's going to put together a pretty good squad that's going to test you coming into Norman. And then you go to Neyland Stadium where you see Nico in year 2 in Josh Heupel's system. I expect him to be better than what he was in year 1. And I think that they're still going to have a good team. And so that's going to be a tough environment, a tough place to play. And it's going to set the tone for that final month of the season. You get a win in that one, and you're flying high with 3 games remaining.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that game's going to be, especially with it being so late in the season, we should have an idea of what this team is. But then at that point, that's the last game of that, like as you mentioned, that long streak of games that you have to play in, like straight. Because I think it's is it 5 games or 6 games straight that you play before you get that next bye week?
You play 5. It starts with Kent State, and then you go Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee. I mean, you can view the Kent State game however you want to view it, but legitimately 5 straight games.
Yeah, that's a lot. If you really think about it, that's a lot.
Especially against the opponents that they have in that stretch.
Yeah, and then wrapping it up on the road against Tennessee, then you get your bye week, and then you got the road game. You go to Tuscaloosa to play against Alabama, and then you get back-to-back home games, in which, still, truth be told, the schedule is still pretty favorable for Oklahoma for the most part. I guess you could really consider it as 4 straight games. Like you said, Kent State, depending on how you want to feel about that. But you get a bye week right before Kent State, so it's like back-to-back quote-unquote buys, and then you play against Texas. It's going to be still a challenge going up against there. But, no, I think that Tennessee game is going to be very important because this is the year where Nico should show up and show out. This will be year 3 in the system, and typically the 3rd year in a Josh Heupel system, the quarterbacks show up. Now, the question is, what's the wide receiver room going to look like in order to help him out with that? They don't have Dylan Sampson, so you don't have your running back that you technically can carry you throughout the entire year. So it's going to be on Nico's back. Yeah. He's going to have to show us. And I said it last year. I was very much in favor of seeing Nico early last season rather than later because I felt like he was going to be better as the season went on. I mean, he somewhat progressed well enough. Now the question is going to be, what does he look like going into these winter workouts in the spring ball, fall camp? Does he continue to grow, and does he come into the season looking good? Which we'll find out in the first couple of weeks. But yeah, that's a very important game, especially on the road. I think that South Carolina one, too, is another one that you can toss in the air of, all right, if Oklahoma really wants to show us something, and if South Carolina actually shows up, I guess that's what my question is. Does South Carolina actually continue the same run they did last season?
Yeah, can Lenora Sellers take another step, which I think he's going to be one of the most exciting quarterbacks to watch in college football this year. Can Dylan Stewart take another step in his development? Are they able to replace Kyle Kennard? Is it going to be the same? They're losing guys too, but I think it is going to be a tough South Carolina team. And then coming out of the Texas game, and then you have to go to Columbia. You got to play in Williams-Brice. You got Sandstorm happening against a tough South Carolina team. That's going to be a difficult road game for sure. And so much of it is going to depend on how you play against Texas. I think the vibes coming out of the Texas game are going to be super meaningful, and it's going to tell us a lot about what this team is going to look like over the rest of the season. What's the game like you're most excited for? It's not necessarily the most important, just you as a football fan. What's the game you're most excited for?
The game I'm most excited for? I'm excited about going to Tuscaloosa. Not gonna lie. It's gonna be fun to go out there and see if we can, own the state of Alabama a second year in a row. That would be fun. I'm really excited about that one. I've been to Ryan Denny before. Awesome stadium. I love the way that they have their video board set up because they got them in 4 corners. So instead of having one really big one like most stadiums do, they've got 4 of them, and so they're in the corners of the upper deck to where you can always have a visual of a screen at all times, which is pretty cool. I thought that was pretty innovative to be able to do that. So you technically don't have a bad seat because you've always got one of those TVs in front of you. So I'm excited to get out there and see that game. Outside of that, Michigan, getting Michigan down here is the second time Oklahoma's played them ever. That is going to be so much fun. It's going to be electric. And then get Sharon Moore making his valiant return back home, and then sending him back to his other house with an L. It's going to feel good.
Yeah, I want to get LSU up to Norman. I think Oklahoma's going to play that game a whole lot differently this next year. You're not going to see them leave the cornerbacks out on an island by themselves. That was one of those games where you're in the first half, you're feeling really good about where you're sitting with LSU, and then it just kind of all fell apart. I think Oklahoma, that's going to be one on the schedule that Oklahoma's going to want to get back because they knew they were in that game, despite the offense not really doing a whole lot. You were still kind of in that game in the first half, and then things started getting away from you towards the end of the half, and then obviously the second half was just get away.
Kickoff return is what killed it. I think that destroyed all the momentum.
It really did.
Take the lead. Mm-hmm. You force a fumble, return it for a touchdown, then you take the lead on a touchdown drive, and then you give up a kickoff right afterwards. And it's like
just killer.
Everything deflated.
Just killer. Just killer. So you know that one's going to be on Brent Venables' mind when they come to Norman at the end of the 2025 season. What do the SEC quarterback rankings look like according to your boy? We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.